I'm going to go ahead and turn this off. And we are going to get started. Welcome to our live presentation on women's health, moving beyond the gender data gap, our live event for today. I am very excited about this topic. My name is Lisa Shoma, by the way. I'm Senior Manager of Content Marketing here at Viome. And we've actually never focused on women's health specifically in our content webinars. And with May being Women's Healthcare Month, it's about time, talking about this subject more and more and getting the information out there will help contribute into filling this gap that exists in female biology specific health and research information, which until very recently has been sparse, if not nearly non-existent. So with that, I am excited. I've asked two outstanding individuals to help us today with this topic. Janelle Connell is Viome's translational science clinical expert and contributes to the endless research and formulation of nutritional recommendations for Viome intelligence tests. And we also have a special guest today to help us with this conversation. Priyanka Jain is the founder and CEO of Evvy, a company focused on destigmatizing vaginal health and offering simple and effective solutions for testing and personalized treatments. So welcome to both of you.
Thanks, Lisa. Excited to be here.
Yes, so excited and very excited to do Viome's first women's health focused webinar. I didn't realize it was a first, but hopefully not last.
Yeah, it's a great way to kick this off. Excellent. So first, I would like to just take the temperature in the room just a little bit. And so I'm going to go to a quick poll here, real quick. And you can answer this right in your Zoom. Are you familiar with the vaginal microbiome? Either yes, and you're here for more information, or no, you want to get a basic understanding, just so we can see who has logged in. All right, it's kind of neck and neck here. I like a good 50-50. All right, we're getting some more. It's kind of winding down a little bit. All right, last chance. All right, I'm going to end the poll and I will share the results. So it looks like it's about 42%. Yes, they are familiar. Excellent. And then 58% are here for more information and understanding. That's a really good gauge of the room. Excellent. So now what I'm going to do is, Janelle, why don't you start us out with a very quick overview of systems biology as our approach here at Viome and how that translates to female biology?
Yeah, sure. So first of all, I'm really excited to be here today. I'm so excited that we have Priyanka. I think this is a really interesting topic. At Viome, we look at things in terms of systems biology. And what we mean by that is that we recognize that the body is a whole unit, right? So our liver health, our kidney health, our gut health, our vaginal health, our hormone health, they are all connected. You can think of it as simple as, our gut health impacts our immune system. Our immunity impacts our vaginal health and our risk for things like yeast infections, urinary tract infections, bacterial vaginosis. So these systems, they all interact and they're connected. And ultimately, the more data we can gather, connecting those dots between these systems, the better able we're going to be to tackle some of the common problems, especially those that affect women's health, which we'll be focused on today. So while my background is more on the gut microbiome side, we have Priyanka here, who is our expert on the vaginal microbiome side of it, and hoping we can, just frame it and learn in a way of, how our system works as a whole.
Excellent. All right. So Priyanka, I'm going to throw things over to you. Let's talk about this gender health gap, how you started Evvy and how your organization developed these solutions for female biology and health.
Yeah, absolutely. So like Lisa mentioned, I'm Priyanka. I'm the co-founder and CEO of Evvy, and very excited to tell you more about what we're building and how it works. So Janelle or Lisa, I don't know who's controlling the slides. If we can go to the next.
I am sorry.
No, don't worry. Thank you. So I started Evvy after realizing some of these wild facts that you see here on the slide, right? That women weren't required to be in clinical research until 1993. And that to this day, we are diagnosed on average 4 years later than men across over 770 diseases. And as someone coming from a data background, what this screamed to me is that we actually have a massive data gap in our understanding of the female body, right? If you think about it, essentially, for most of history, we studied middle-aged, mid-sized white men, and we assumed that women were just small men. We could make medicine smaller and it would work. And obviously, as I think everyone here who is a woman can attest, obviously that is not working for us. And there are so many signals that uniquely exist in the female body that we're not paying attention to. And when you think about it, right, like the female body is so much more complex, right? There's so many more things to go wrong. We should be better at detecting disease in women than we are in men. And yet here we are, diagnosed on average 4 years later. And so at Evvy, if you want to go to the next slide, Lisa, what we're really curious about is what are those female specific biomarkers, right? Those signals that the female body uniquely creates that if we could do a better job measuring and tracking, we could finally improve outcomes in female healthcare. And if you go to the next slide, the first set of biomarkers that we are focused on at Evvy is everything going on in the vaginal microbiome. And usually when I say that, I get one of two questions. Either what is the vaginal microbiome, which it seems like maybe 40% of people here already have an answer to that, which is great. Or two, why is that an important marker to start with? So I figured I'd start by answering that question, and then we can dive in a little bit deeper. If you want to go to the next slide, thank you. So obviously, I'm assuming everyone here is familiar with the microbiome to some degree, right? It's a community of microbes that live somewhere in or on a part of your body, right? There's the microbiome that exists in your gut, in your mouth, on your skin. And it turns out we also have a microbiome in our vaginas. And as I always joke, the microbiome in the vagina isn't just hanging out there, right? And when you think about, the vagina structurally in the female body, it's essentially this gateway between the outside world, which is full of tons of different microbes and pathogens. And then on the other side of the vagina are some of our most important reproductive organs. And essentially, it turns out that we've evolved with this community of microbes that are actually playing a really interesting local immune type role, if you will. And what I mean by that, if you go to the next slide, is that when the vaginal microbiome is in an optimal or healthy state, it's dominated by protective bacteria, the most common of which you might have heard of, are lactobacilli, for example. And the reason those bacteria are protective is because what they're actually doing is producing lactic acid, taking up space on the vaginal wall, and making it difficult for any of those pathogens in the outside world to be able to replicate or thrive in the vaginal environment. Meaning that they essentially keep those pathogens outside. They prevent them from moving up the reproductive tract. And, if you go to the next slide, Lisa, thank you. But, I always say, God forbid you live your life, you have sex with someone new, you have a long menstrual cycle, semen and menstrual blood both have a higher pH than the natural vaginal environment. And when the pH rises, what you see is that these pathogens are then able to replicate, right? That barrier that was keeping them out isn't there anymore. And we, as people with vaginas, start to experience the reasons that we go to the doctor very frequently, right? Bacterial vaginosis, which is an overgrowth of these types of pathogenic bacteria, yeast infections, recurrent UTIs, et cetera. But what's interesting to me is that in this kind of breakdown of the protective vaginal microbiome barrier, not only are we having these infections and symptoms, but it turns out that the breakdown in this barrier also causes or is also associated with a variety of other female health outcomes. If we go to the next slide, what your research is starting to show is that this breakdown in the vaginal microbiome, or that barrier that exists between the outside world and the rest of the reproductive tract, then is associated not only with these infections, but also things like IVF failure or preterm birth or STI acquisition or cervical cancer progression and so much more. And if you go to the next slide, this breakdown that I'm talking about is not, a small niche problem, as many people like to say to me back in the day when I was starting the company. It turns out that at any given point, up to 30% of women have vaginal dysbiosis or bacterial vaginosis, meaning that their vaginal microbiome has been disrupted. They don't have that protective barrier anymore. And vaginal discomfort is actually the leading reason in the US that women seek healthcare advice. So this is an extremely prevalent problem. And when people go to the doctor with these symptoms and conditions, extremely frustratingly, they're more likely to be misdiagnosed than correctly diagnosed. And then even when they are correctly diagnosed and get the right treatment, you're more likely not to get better than you are to get better. And what's crazy to me is on top of the fact that these are so prevalent and so frustrating, they're also costing the system so much money in terms of their downstream health implications, right? Whether it's the way that the vaginal microbiome plays a role in fertility and pregnancy or cancer progression, STI acquisition, and more. If you go to the next slide. And it's crazy that even though, this condition is so prevalent, it's so frustrating, and it's so expensive and detrimental to our overall health, it's wild to me that bacterial vaginosis, which is the most common vaginal infection, is still clinically defined as a quote unquote overgrowth of bacteria. Literally completely non-specific to what bacteria, how much of it, which types, how is it interacting. It's just a very, very broad diagnosis, right? But when you actually look at what's going on, right? And wildly, our clinical definition has not changed since we invented sequencing. So since we could actually look at what was going on in the microbiome, we haven't actually changed our definition of the condition. But when you actually look, when you do use this newer technology to actually sequence what's going on down there, what you find is that it's actually much more complex than just an overgrowth of bacteria, right? And it turns out that if we really want to have effective preventative vaginal health care, we have to be much, much more precise. And so obviously that's what we're trying to change at Evvy. If you go to the next slide, in July of 2021, Evvy launched the first ever at-home vaginal microbiome test that leverages whole genome sequencing, meaning we look at all bacteria and fungi that are present to help anyone with a vagina better understand what's going on down there, how it's related to their health goals and why it matters to them, and then also what they can actually do about it. And if you go to the next slide. So very excitingly, ever since we launched the platform almost 2 years ago now, we've been able to really give people access to information on their bodies that they've never had before, right? And as I'm sure many of you experienced with Viome, finally getting answers to something that has been frustrating you for a long time, and you've gone to doctor after doctor to be told either it's fine, it's in your head, I don't know what's going on, I don't know why it keeps coming back. And for so many people, this is the first time that they're able to finally get these comprehensive answers to what's really going on. And along with actually doing, the one-on-one results and coaching that we do with every single one of our patients, we also have done a ton of work around destigmatization and demystifying so many of these conditions related to vaginal health, right? Because, these are some of the most common conditions that exist, and yet people are so poorly educated on them, right? This is a part of our body that we're not familiar with, that we don't have the words to talk about. And so we've done a lot of work to really bring better scientifically backed education to people with vaginas.
And Priyanka, maybe I'll just jump in here a little bit.
Yeah.
Since, like you were saying, this might go misdiagnosed or the diagnosis is really broad, are there things that people should maybe look for or be aware of, like some common symptoms that maybe we want to think about before maybe having a test done?
That's great.
Yeah, such a good question. So, there's so many things under this. So I think that for so long, people with vaginas have normalized their symptoms, right? Like, oh, it's normal for me to have pain with sex, right? Or it's normal for it to feel dry down there. And yes, those things are common, but they're not normal, right? And they are things that we should be able to help get to the bottom of. I would say the most common things to look out for are changes in discharge, when you feel itchy or uncomfortable or burning. All of those are signs that there might be something going on, and definitely reasons that you should go to the doctor. And if you're interested in a more comprehensive picture of what's going on, that's obviously where Evvy can come in. And I think, Janelle, to that question, something that's interesting to think about is I feel like Viome talks about this all the time, right? We're so reactive in our healthcare, right? And something that bothers me so much is that one of the criteria when you go to the doctor's office to be diagnosed with vaginitis is literally, does it smell, right? And I'm like, we are waiting until the vaginal microbiome is in full dysbiosis to the point where you can smell it until we do anything about it, right? And our hope at Evvy is that by providing people with this information proactively, we can take proactive care of the vaginal microbiome and avoid the situations where we have pain, discomfort, itching, discharge, odor, all of those things.
Right. Yeah. And I know that, that bacterial vaginosis or other infections are also linked to like fertility issues, other consequences down the road, right? So if we can address it sooner, maybe we don't have to experience some of those challenges.
Exactly. And I mean, exactly what you said at the beginning of this presentation, right? These things are all connected. It's not, and I think it's so frustrating how much we've separated all of these different pieces out, right? Like fertility has nothing to do with what's going on in your vagina, but like obviously those two things are related, right? Mm-hmm. And I think there's so much education to be done of doctors and of patients of all of the research that's happened over the past couple of decades so that we can be much more proactive and preventative. I feel like the research is, 20, 30 years ahead of the clinicians, and our hope is that Evvy can kind of bridge that gap.
That's great.
And I think this is maybe the last thing I'll say before we can dive into more of a conversation here. But I think what's been so exciting is, like I said, we launched this platform in July of 2021. We now have by far the world's largest data set ever on the vaginal microbiome, looking at not only the comprehensive data of what's going on in the vaginal microbiome, but also the metadata, right? How do symptoms manifest differently of people from different races or from different geographic locations or different ages? How is vaginitis different for someone in menopause versus someone who's postpartum? What's the role of your birth control or your menstrual cycles or your PCOS diagnosis, right? Like you said, all of these things are related, but nobody's ever put all of that data together. And what's been really exciting, especially given, what I started this presentation with, which is the fact that we've done so little research on female bodies and so much of female healthcare is a medical mystery, right? And our approach, very similar to Viome's, is that bringing better data to the problem is what's going to solve it. And I think what you're actually seeing on the slide here is two examples of that, right? On the left side is the genetic composition of a microbe that, when you go to the doctor, is considered pathogenic. But what you're seeing here is that there is so much variety in what we consider this single pathogenic species, and that these different genetic variations are then associated with differences in symptoms and differences in symptoms in different types of people. And that actually, if you want to know what's pathogenic, you probably need to get a lot more specific than what we're doing today. And then on the right side of this, what you're looking at is, again, a single species, a single microbe. And it's something that women go to the doctor for today and are told it's perfectly normal, you're fine. And obviously they're not feeling fine. And what we're seeing is, again, that there's a huge amount of variation in these things that we consider all as one today. And I think all of this points to kind of the general problem in women's health, right? Which is that conditions are defined too broadly to be solved. And our hope at Evvy is that we can bring better data to enable the specificity that's required to unlock effective treatments. Because we can never have better treatments if we don't define diseases at a specific enough level that we can solve them. And I think I'll end with my favorite analogy that one of our advisors always says, which is, when we had cancer, it was unsolvable. When we had lung cancer, it was still unsolvable. But then we had, this specific mutation of this specific gene. And when we got to that level, it became a problem that you could solve. And I think so much of women's healthcare still lives at the level of cancer and lung cancer. And our hope at Evvy is that we can bring the data to the problem that will allow us to get to that very specific level so that we can unlock the opportunity for treatments that women have deserved for far too long. But I'm so excited to talk about how all of these things come together. So I will leave you with that.
Awesome. Thank you. Look, the work that you and your teams are doing at Evvy is groundbreaking. And I'm really, really glad that you're bringing these solutions to the consumer market where women everywhere can access this easily, just removing that red tape to get help for themselves. It's so fantastic. And so now that we have all that information, thank you. I want to bring Janelle back in to add a nutritional dimension to this picture of female specific health, and specifically how the gut microbiome, nutrition, and the female microbiome are connected and impact each other. Janelle.
Yeah, well, I think it's super interesting. I guess I'll start to saying, we're very confident that what we eat impacts our gut microbiome, right? We've got a ton of studies. We've got our studies here at Viome. We can see that data. So could it also be impacting our vaginal microbiome? And to Priyanka's point, like there's just not a lot of data on that yet. And hopefully with her work and more research, we'll gather some of that. There's a few studies that we have. I've listed them here. If anyone wants them later, we'll copy and paste them over to you. But one study looked at about 295 women, right? And they reported what they were eating with food frequency questionnaires. So there's some, some challenges with that, but what it does give us at least is we can kind of group people together by their types of diets. So we can look at like the women who were classified under an unhealthy diet. And that was mostly like higher sugar, higher oil, saturated fats, refined carbs, all the things you think of in like a Western diet, right? Those women in that group were 2 to 3 times higher risk of bacterial vaginosis. On the flip side, when we looked at the women who have, in this study, who have ovo-vegetarian diet, so they were eating a lot more beans, vegetables was a much higher intake, obviously less sugar, they had eggs, their risk was 84% lower. So as we start to gather some of that data, we can see what we eat makes a difference, right? I mean, intuitively, we all know that and we feel it.
Right. And it's so funny because so many doctors that we talked to in the early days were like, there's no way your diet affects your vaginal microbiome. You can eat as much sugar as you want. And we, as people with vaginas, are like, that is not true. Let me tell you from our own experiences, it's not. And it's so frustrating that we haven't had the data to put behind these exact types of questions. But I think studies like this are important. And I think obviously, hopefully the continued work that we're both doing and hopefully we can do together someday soon can help start to answer this question, because it's a question so many women have and they experiment with so much. And it's wild to me that there's not more research on this and that any doctor could deny it.
Yeah, 100%. I think like the one thing we have that's like common knowledge now is cranberry for UTIs, right? And I think that's about it. I don't know how much more we have
juice has so much sugar in it. Like there's so many, people end up in this cycle because what you really want is the D-mannose, which is a very small part of cranberry juice. So anyways, yes, I agree. There's a lot more to be done.
Yeah. So, so far, maybe we're seeing what our gut likes is probably also good for our vaginal microbiome, right? More fiber, more vegetables, probably more polyphenols, things like that. On the flip side, higher sugar intakes, higher saturated fat, those seem to have a negative impact and a higher risk for BV. We need more data. It might be because of that, Priyanka was talking about, we want to create like a barrier so those pathogens can't get in. And when we have a higher sugar diet, that tends to impact our immune response. So hopefully more to come there. We can flip over to the next slide, Lisa. Okay, so one area that we know a little bit more on is related to our hormone balance. And I wanted to tie this in. I know this slide looks scary. I'm bringing you all back to biology class here, but I really like it because it shows like the different systems in our body and how they can be connected. So this slide in particular is related to estrogen balance. Estrogen dominance, or like an excess of estrogen in the body, is actually the most common hormone imbalance. And it's associated with a lot of symptoms. I listed them here on the left, bloating, irregular periods, mood swings, headaches, kind of sounds like PMS, hair loss, weight gain, really, really common symptoms that a lot of women experience. But not only are there symptoms with that, it's also connected with some serious health conditions. So PCOS, dementia, or vaginal yeast infections. There are some serious consequences to having that imbalance in your hormones, right? If we look at this slide, we have estrogen. It's floating around in our body, in our bloodstream. Our ovaries produce it, our fat tissues produce it. And our liver's job is to help keep it in balance. So it gets sent to the liver, and the liver packages it all up so that we can excrete some of that and keep our body in balance. So it sends those conjugated estrogens out, and they can either go to the kidneys, be excreted through the urine, or they can go to the intestines, right? And here's really where I think a big role where food comes in, right? Is the state of our gut microbiome and what it's doing to this process. So within the gut, we have bacteria, and there are some bacteria who are really good at kind of creating their little colony and deconjugating that estrogen. And when they do that, that estrogen's free again, and it can get absorbed right back into the body and impact that balance of hormones within our body. The way I think of this is like when I clean my kids' closets, right? I have 3 kids. Cleaning the closet's the worst thing because I love getting rid of everything. So I'm like the liver, I'm packaging it all up, I'm sending it, let's get it out of here, right? And then in the background, like my 7-year-old's like slowly sneaking it back into the closet. So that's what can happen when our microbiome is out of balance. And it's a big underlying cause of this excess estrogen within the body. Let's look at go ahead.
I was just going to say one more thing that I think, obviously an excess of estrogen can be problematic, but also so can not having enough estrogen. And especially with the vaginal microbiome, I saw somebody asked about older age, right? And as someone starts going through menopause or approaching perimenopause, what you see is as the estrogen levels decrease, that estrogen produces glycogen, and glycogen is actually a really important food source for the healthy bacteria in the vaginal microbiome. And so when estrogen levels are low, you often also see an increase in risk of vaginal infections. And so I think it's a classic, double-edged sword. It needs to be in good balance. And this is where the gut microbiome and the estrobolome plays such an important role for sure. But I just wanted to say that having low levels of estrogen is also not good for vaginal health.
Yes, no, I'm so glad you brought that up because estrogen is so important, right? And not only, like you're saying, with vaginal health, it's important for our bone health also. It plays a lot of roles in the body. And so ultimately, we want that balance. We want it there. We just don't want it to be dominating our progesterone and our other hormones. All right, let's look at the next one. There are probably a lot of solutions. There are a lot of solutions to finding hormonal balance. And like I said, that hormonal balance impacts not only our vaginal health, but other areas of our health as well. I picked a few here because I like, again, back to the systems biology approach, that we can target it kind of in a few different directions. The first one is, keep your bowels moving. So fiber helps bind up that excess estrogen. There's been studies, they look at, women who eat higher fiber diets or more vegetarian diets, they have higher levels of estrogen excretion. So that can help the body better balance your hormones. Part of that would be reducing constipation. So we don't want all those, conjugated estrogens just sitting around there in the gut for a long period of time. Then the microbes get a chance to work on them. So we want to keep the system moving and have, regular bowel movements. The third part is move your body. Exercise helps prevent constipation, helps keep you regulars. We want to find some daily movement in there as well. All right, second bullet, increase your microbial diversity. I think this is an area that we definitely need more research on. Both I think in the gut and the vaginal microbiome, it will be interesting to see how both of those play a role. There are some preliminary studies, they're mostly in animals, and they show that probiotics can have an impact on that group of microbes that are responsible for metabolizing estrogen. So there's the potential that taking probiotics, eating fermented foods, things like that can help your body stay in better balance. All right, reduce alcohol. Not a fun one to hear, but cutting out alcohol actually helps support our liver health. So back to that picture, that liver plays a role, right? So women who drink less alcohol or don't drink actually were found to have lower estrogen levels than women who do drink alcohol. So we want to support those detox pathways as much as possible and just, keep alcohol to once in a while. And last one, stress management. So what happens when we're stressed? We get all of that cortisol, right? Cortisol is our stress hormone. It's also like the same building blocks are used to make cortisol that they are for progesterone. So if we are super stressed, our body's going to make cortisol. What's it not going to do? It's not going to make a lot of progesterone, right? And then we get an imbalance. So it's not necessarily that we're overproducing estrogen, but we're not producing enough progesterone to balance that. So managing your stress. At Viome, we do look at cortisol production pathways in our full body intelligence test. So that's an interesting one to get some insight there. But we do want to have that stress management helps keep your hormones in balance.
Can I add a couple of things to this slide?
Yeah.
I think one interesting thing to note is that microbial diversity is great in the gut and actually not what you want in the vagina, which I just think is something helpful to know, because so many people interested in the microbiome space are always like, diversity is good. And actually in the vaginal microbiome, diversity is a metric that's often used in correlation with dysbiosis or bacterial vaginosis. So what you want in the vaginal microbiome is actually dominance. You want strong dominance by protective bacteria that are playing that role that I mentioned earlier, right? Producing that lactic acid, taking up space on the vaginal wall, fighting pathogens for you. And when you have diversity, you actually see that whole barrier break down. So just wanted to clarify, increasing microbial diversity, great for the gut, not good for the vagina. And then I see a lot of questions in the chat right now about menopause and about hormones and estrogen. And I just wanted to say a couple of things. I think, and sorry, Lisa, I didn't mean to jump the gun.
Oh no, that's totally fine.
Great.
I was going to be like, cool. No, we can totally segue. You can do whatever you like.
I was just going to say, I think that one of the things that's, another symptom of the gender health gap is the lack of research specifically on women in menopause for everything, but obviously also vaginal health. If you are a woman in menopause experiencing vaginal symptoms, you are so not alone. Vaginal symptoms are actually more common than hot flashes, even though we talk about them less because of some good old stigmas and taboos that we fight through every day. But the role of estrogen in the vaginal microbiome is important. And I think, we could probably have a whole separate conversation about the role of taking estrogen, but estrogen is such an important part of the body functioning. And when, we are living a lot more years in menopause than we ever did in the past. And so I think having a conversation with your doctor about the role that estrogen can have in helping improve your vaginal symptoms, as well as other symptoms, as well as your bone health and brain health, and so many other things that Janelle pointed to is important. And a lot of the initial studies that made us wary of that have been debunked. So I just wanted to say that because I think it's important. I will take estrogen when I approach menopause. I encourage all of the important women in my life to do the same. And so I just do think there's been a lot of stigma and misinformation on that topic. And estrogen is an incredibly, incredibly important part of the female body functioning, including the vaginal microbiome.
Absolutely. I have a question on that. So taking estrogen versus taking nutrients or supplements that can have your body create more estrogen. Is there a difference when you get older, like my age? Should you focus on that? What is your thought about that?
Janelle, I don't know, I feel like that's up your alley of expertise.
I know. I do think that's a conversation with your doctor. I think the body's natural course is to produce less as we get older. So I think there's some question of how much can you produce with supplements alone. But yeah, definitely worth talking to your doctor about.
Okay, good. Well, we do have some questions here. I'd like to throw them out and see how many in the few minutes that we have left, how many we can tackle. Michelle, I just want to let you know that there will be a link sent out tomorrow for this. So you can watch the replay. So no worries there. So Leanne asks, this is specific. Does Candida albicans disrupt the vaginal microbiome and how? And you were talking about dominance of the good bacteria, Priyanka. Do you have an answer for that?
Yeah, definitely. So Candida albicans is the most common culprit behind yeast infections. So Candida is the species of fungi that cause yeast infections most commonly. Albicans is the most common one that does so. I will say that it lives symbiotically, and I think about 20% of vaginas. So just having it there does not necessarily mean that you have a yeast infection. Most people know when they have a yeast infection, it's not comfortable. Yes, it does disrupt the vaginal microbiome when it overgrows. And that's when you start to see the symptoms and associations that come from that. And one other last thing I'll mention on Candida is that there are different species of Candida that can cause vaginal infections, and they do respond differently to treatment. So if you're somebody who's had a lot of recurrent yeast infections and hasn't actually been tested in a long time, and they don't seem to be going away, actually getting them tested and seeing if it's albicans or glabrata is often the one that causes infections that don't respond to the classic medications. It's just something worth keeping an eye on. And obviously Evvy can help with that as well.
All right. Thank you, Liana, for that question. Carol asks, what effect does a vinegar and water douche have?
Douching in general is a big no-no from the vaginal health community generally. I'm sure you've heard the vagina is a self-cleaning oven, but if you do have an infection, a douche is only going to make it worse. You're going to not only hurt the bad bacteria, but also the good bacteria. So just douching in general disrupts the vaginal microbiome in a negative way.
Okay. All right. So Catherine asks, in addition to diagnosis, does Evvy also approach solutions via dietary recommendations similar to Viome, or is the science not there yet?
Great question. So we don't do diet recommendations because unfortunately, as you alluded to, the science isn't there yet, but we do provide full actually clinical care. So we connect, if someone's microbiome is in dysbiosis, we're able to connect you to a doctor who specializes in the vaginal microbiome, who's able to prescribe you treatments, both medications when necessary, but then also vaginally accessible supplements, probiotics, et cetera, to help rebuild a protective vaginal microbiome.
Awesome. Fantastic. Thanks, Catherine. Carolyn asks, how important is vaginal health for senior women who are still active sexually?
Another great question. The vaginal health is important throughout your life, truly end to end. People always ask me what our range of ages are, and it's the full range. If you're still active sexually, having a disruptive vaginal microbiome can increase the risk of sexually transmitted infections, as well as potential HPV progression it's been associated with. So I would say taking care of your vaginal health is important at all stages of life.
Totally agree. Thank you, Carolyn. So Q asks, does Evvy testing provide any insights to fibroids? Many say fibroids are related to hormones, but are the microbial composition a concern also?
Great question. That's actually something we are researching now, because classically my answer is the gender health gap has prevented a lot of research here.
All right. Okay, so this one is a long one. Let's see. Nicole says, clinicians at Harvard, Cleveland Clinic, Mayo Clinic, they deny infections in the vaginal microbiome in clinical practice. Of particular importance is the relation of E. coli to endometriosis and Babesia, to ovarian cancer. Currently, the labs are refusing to report these types of infections and defining them as normal flora. What can a patient do to get treatment if they are having an abnormal test, but the doctors are refusing to treat? Okay.
Yeah, it's so tough. I think for so many women have had experiences going to the doctor and everything being, it's normal, it's fine. I think the real answer is that there's again, not enough information and research on what is normal, what is fine. So I would say if you're not getting good answers, then you should find a doctor that will help you more. Evvy can connect you to doctors that are experts in the vaginal microbiome and can help you get treatment. when it's necessary. So obviously this is part of why we started the company. We really hope to help with this, but I know it's a problem today.
All right. So next, thank you for that question. Betsy asks, can the Evvy test be combined with full body intelligence testing and supplement plan if we are already on a subscription? So Betsy, we don't do that right now. I mean, obviously it seems like logical that we would do something like that, but I think there's probably a little bit more work that needs to be done. Priyanka, what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, one day we'll get there. Evvy and Viome are just at the beginning of our collaborations.
Awesome. Awesome. Very good. Let's see. Aaron asks, what is a good level of estrogen? What's our benchmark? I feel like I can't get a good answer about what my hormonal balance looks like from a number standpoint.
Janelle, do you want to answer that one?
Yeah, tricky one. Kind of depends on where you're at, right? Premenopause, menopause, postmenopause. It's going to be really different depending on that. And even if you're still having a regular period, it's going to vary during your cycle. So in that type of phase, it can be just wildly different. I think it's connecting with a good doctor who can track some of those, and you can have more than one test done to see where you're at different, stages in your cycle and make sure you're having that normal curve. Is probably the best thing. If you're postmenopause, you're probably somewhere below 30 on those test results, but yeah, connect with a good doctor there.
All right. Thanks, Aaron. All right. Let's see. Sorry, progesterone. Camille asked, how about the role of progesterone? I found often it's not as much as high estrogen being a culprit, but insufficient progesterone causing many issues. So progesterone is about balancing your hormones. Am I correct about that, or is that not correct? Do we think?
All right, Lisa, repeat that question for me
So
again.
it's Camille,
the role of progesterone.
The role of progesterone, I found often it's not as much about high estrogen being a culprit, but insufficient progesterone causing many issues.
Yeah, that can totally be true. So it's really about the balance between the two of them. So if you don't have enough progesterone, you still can have that estrogen dominance, even though your estrogen levels are normal, because they're not in balance of each other. So progesterone can definitely be a culprit.
All right. Zabeth says, as a menopausal woman, I'm hoping you'll present some information about our microbiomes when we no longer have estrogen. But you can test at any time, correct, Priyanka? Just so it doesn't matter if you're producing estrogen or not.
Yeah, and we can also help. I think almost 20% of our members are in menopause. So we have a huge cohort of women who are dealing with vaginal symptoms in menopause. And we are trying to put together a lot of research around it, because I think we also have the largest data set on that topic. So hopefully a lot more coming soon, but definitely our doctors and care team can be helpful.
All right. Excellent. Thank you for that question. All right. So we are at just about time here. I do realize there's a lot more questions here. I'm sorry that we cannot get to all of them, but I'm hoping to have more conversations and more talks about this in the future. And Priyanka, I would love to have you back to have follow-up conversations so you can present more data that you've gotten with your work. That would be wonderful. So what we're going to do is I want to thank everybody for joining us today. But before we end, Priyanka, would you like to let everybody know about Evvy.com and your special offer to everybody today?
Yes, definitely. So I hope that obviously that was helpful and insightful. There's so much more for all of us to learn about our vaginal health. And I think we're just at the beginning of a time in which, hopefully we won't have as many questions and frustrations as we've had in the past. But we are so excited to finally be partnering with Viome. And we'd love for any Viome members to join us at Evvy. You can use the code Viome10 at Evvy.com. You can also follow us on Instagram and on TikTok. We have some very funny, in my opinion, content about what it's like to be a person with a vagina. So we hope that we are able to provide you with some educational and funny content so that we can laugh about these problems that unfortunately we all deal with. And hopefully we can be helpful to many of you soon.
Awesome. Excellent. This is easy. This is accessible. Thank you for, pardon me, my allergies are like dying here. Thank you for, Pardon me. Thank you for giving our audience a special discount. And pardon my voice, but I also do have, while you're taking care of your vaginal microbiome, I also have a quick offer as well. With the code MayWebinar at Viome.com. You can get a full body intelligence test, either to start or continue on your health journey. Priyanka and Janelle, thank you both so much for joining me today and giving us the opportunity to listen and find out more about women's health, vaginal health, and wellness. Everybody on the call, thank you for coming here today and spending time with us. Have a wonderful day, and we'll see you back here very soon.
Thanks for having me.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you. Thank you. Bye-bye.